I'll play. You're going to start it, okay?
Aaron.
You're,
That's fine.
That's Aaron.
Aaron, right?
That's right.
Hey.
Oh, hey, folks, we're here. Right? Well, Super Tuesday coming up tomorrow. And if you hadn't voted already, then you better get out there tomorrow. And remember, there's also next week, next Saturday, will be our precinct conventions. I tried to tell you before that the real grassroots level precinct political activities, the grassroots level starts at your precinct level. And everybody can go to one. And it's really easy to become a delegate to your senatorial district convention. And if you get to that, it's really easy to be a delegate at the state convention. I've been there 2 or 3 times, but I can't hardly, I always had to work and stuff. But it's really fun. It's neat to do, and we need to do it. I'm going to start us off by let our guests introduce ourselves. We got Aaron over here.
All right.
Go ahead, Aaron. Tell us who you are and what you do and stuff like that.
Well, my name is Aaron Woodall, as he said, and I'm currently a sophomore at Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. I major in political science with a minor in history. I'm also competing on the Southwestern University Moot Court team this coming fall, and I'm here to support Rubio.
Oh, I thought you were a Donald Trump fan.
No, sir.
Okay.
Anyone but Trump. Anyone but Trump.
Next.
And my name is Connor Joyce. I work for State Representative Molly White. I attend Southwestern University also. I work as a freelance journalist, and just recently I was elected to the student representative body of Southwestern, and I support Carson for president.
Go ahead.
My name's James King. I'm a Libra. I'm a high school senior. I enjoy high school debate. I am an 8-year classically trained violinist. I work alongside these two gentlemen, Aaron and Connor, on the Molly White re-election campaign, and I'm happy to be here.
And I'm Mark Pulliam. I'm a retired attorney, graduate of the University of Texas Law School, and I've been following the judicial elections this cycle pretty closely and have written about all of the Texas Supreme Court races in National Review Online and in the American Spectator. And I've also taken a look at the Court of Criminal Appeals races and look forward to talking about that tonight.
And we certainly look forward to hearing about that. Maury Gandy,
Hi, everybody.
you haven't been on the air down here at Channel Austin in a long time,
Not for a while, yeah.
so we're glad you are here. And I know you're a big Cruz fan. I
Oh,
got to
am
find
a
me a Trump
big
fan
super
somewhere.
Cruz fan, yes.
10-4.
I've been reading about him and following him since 2005 when he helped with the 10 Commandments here at the Capitol, when he
Well-
was our solicitor attorney.
Well, I'm a Mark Pulliam fan because I've always pushed these down ballot races. And anyway, go ahead, Michael Lee.
I'm Mike Lee. I'm an attorney, and I'm also the Outreach and Engagement Director for the Travis County Republican Party.
Well, we're getting a lot of attorneys down here at the trailer park. I'm starting to get a little worried.
Well, we've always been a capital of attorneys, you know that.
Yeah, that's true. And this one comes from UT, and I know they just pour them out down there. Not like the good ones, I understand, come from St. Mary's. Is that right? Nothing personal there. Go ahead. All right. Trump. You say you ain't a Trump fan. Each of y'all tell me what's so bad about Trump. Could you? Start down there at the end. Go ahead.
Oh, that's not
All right.
fair.
Well,
tell us what's good about the candidate you favor.
I think
We're going to get to that. First, I want to hear bad things about Trump.
to address the first question about Trump, I think it's pretty hard to begin where I dislike Trump, because I think I'll have to start with the fact that I don't think he's a Republican. I think if you look at his record and his public statements, it's pretty clear that he is whoever the audience that he's looking at needs him to be. He's a excellent salesperson, and he's proven that throughout this race. But he's not a principled conservative, and I'm afraid of what he might do or might not do as president of the United States. He's definitely not someone that I would trust to run the country.
Hold on. Before we go any further, I just got to ask, can you define Republican for me?
define Republican.
Yeah, I mean,
Well,
you say he's not a real Republican, and I've heard this term a lot.
Well, what I said specifically was he's not a conservative. He's obviously running under the Republican banner, but I think whenever you're looking at what a Republican should be, it's someone who believes in the principles of small government, of individual liberty, and who's going to stand up for the Judeo-Christian values that our country was founded upon.
Yeah,
And
well.
I think if you look at Donald Trump, he's not. He's been wishy-washy on all those things.
10-4. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Aaron. But instead of addressing, Trump's Republican or Democratic stance, I would just have to address his stance in general and say that, Trump severely lacks any substance when it comes to policy proposals. He says he's going to make America great again, but when you ask how, there's really no answer. And that's unfortunate because we're at a time in our country where we need answers to those questions. We need our candidates to be well informed, to be able to implement their policies. And simply being able to say emphatically that America is going to be great again is a lot different from actually being able to do it.
Good answer.
Boy, well-articulated young men down here. Huh?
I'd have to say the number one reason that I dislike Trump is the man's hair, which is honestly questionable. No, but in all seriousness, I think the number one reason that I dislike Trump is, and Aaron alluded to this, is that he's not really sure what he's going to do when he gets to office. We can look at the last Republican debates. We can look at Rubio questioning him on what exactly his plans were for amnesty and other projects like that, and he wasn't really able to provide him with an answer. I think Trump's pretty much like the schoolyard bully who suddenly happened upon the GOP ticket here, and he really has no idea what he's going to do as president. And that's a dangerous quality to have in a leader, someone that doesn't know and is not exactly sure what they're going to do when they get into the highest office of the United States of America.
Hold
And,
on.
you
Before you go on, I'd like to ask him, why do you think Trump decided to run?
I'm honestly not sure. I think he likes fame. He likes to be in front of crowds, and he likes the power. Honestly, I don't think he has America's best interest at heart.
There's a quote that I saw, and I haven't substantiated this myself, but it was from an interview that he gave with, I think, People magazine in like 2000 or 2001 or something. And he said that if he was going to ever run for president, he would run as a Republican because the Republican primary voters he believed to be just stupid enough that he could manipulate into voting for him. And I think you see the fruits of that right here.
Yep.
And
Hold on, Mark.
to kind of go off of something that James was talking about earlier, we joke about not liking Trump because of his hair, but Trump's the kind of person, and he said this repeatedly throughout the campaign trail, that will actually make substantive policy decisions based off of something like someone's hair.
Right.
And he believes that his stance is legitimized by nothing other than his poll numbers and his popularity, and instead of anything more substantial, like Connor said.
Before we go on, Miss Pokey, the producer, always gets a
I
chance.
got one good one. Here you go. I'm going to do my Donald imitation. You're fired. 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 Y'all are fired.
Hold on, Molly, just got here.
You're fired.
Besides, I always get to do the fire.
You're fired. Yeah, I like this. I love this one. You're fired.
So that's why you're voting for it?
No. Told you I didn't.
I know, Mom.
But you gotta love the Donald.
All right, Mark, where were we?
Well, we're talking about why we don't like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he is a reality TV star, and he's treating this political campaign like it's a reality TV show, although sometimes it more resembles professional wrestling.
Well, wasn't he a wrestler before too? Didn't he? Wasn't he the MC or something for a wrestling show years ago?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
What concerns me,
I never heard that one.
what concerns me about him is he has this authoritarian streak. He loves to bully. He loves to threaten people. He's brought lots of lawsuits over the course of his career. He's threatened a lot of lawsuits, even during this campaign. He doesn't like being criticized. Just this last week, he was quoted as saying that if he's president, he's going to change the law. How he's going to do that, I don't know, to make it easier to sue newspapers. So if the Washington Post or the New York Times says things that he doesn't like, he can file lawsuits against them. Mm-hmm. He has expressed admiration for the Russian dictator Putin. He has said things that he respects the strength that the Chinese government has shown suppressing dissent in China. These are really scary things for a presidential candidate to be saying, and especially somebody running under the Republican banner. This is supposedly the party of limited government. So there's a lot of disaffected people out there who like what he has to say about immigration and trade, and a lot of the people that have voted so far are Democrats or people that have never voted before who have voted in the Republican primaries. But it's very concerning to me, and how we're all going to rally behind him if he's the nominee is something that I can't even imagine.
Well, that's been my problem. I know Mike's got something to go on here. Stupid voters. I heard somewhere, I think it was on that KLBJ AM today, that the Republican primaries is collecting all the idiot voters out there. In fact, you say that none of them ever voted or something. I don't know, but he's packing them in.
Well,
we'll go there later.
And I would say that it isn't necessarily that the voters are stupid. It's that Trump has tapped into their anger. He's tapped into the fact that they've been held back by political correctness, that they've been forced to accept policies by an overbearing administration. Those are the things that Trump is tapping into. But what we don't realize as voters is that we're not necessarily departing from that overbearing executive by choosing Trump. Instead, we're reverting back to it.
Yeah. And I think also another reason for his popularity among the primary electorate is if you look at the actual people that are voting since the primary system was implemented in sometime around the mid-1970s, it's always the most extreme third of the Republican electorate that comes out, and the same is true for the other side as well. The most extreme third of the liberals that come out for the Democrats during the primary season, and so that pool specifically is among the more disaffected and the more angry voters that are that Donald Trump is pulling in.
Mr. Lee?
I'm probably going to get in trouble, but I have this bad habit of really saying what I feel is the truth. And in this country, the way things have evolved, the truth seems to be the most unpopular thing. Now, as far as Trump's popularity, I first of all have to recognize that the Republican Party has kind of a dual nature. We have Lincoln Republicans, and we have Republicans who used to be Dixiecrats who defected from the Democratic Party. I believe that Trump's appeal is to the greater part of the old Dixiecrats, not the Lincoln Republicans. I believe that he's tapped into the anger that people feel. And for some reason, it's easier for people to hate than it is to love. We generally have to be taught to love. We hate real good on our own. And he's tapped into the negativity. And there's more negativeness out there than there's positive things. I think this is the challenge. I also believe that I think Trump may be a prop, because I think he gives Hillary the best chance to win.
Just a conspiracy theory coming out, or?
No, it's just
okay.
What it seems to be that I observe of American nature. It's easy to me when I analyze political movements for the last, probably since 1896. It's anti-white male. Any strong you name, it's anti-white male. And Trump gives them the best opportunity to play the hate the white man card.
Yeah. Huh. Maury, you want to throw anything in on that?
No.
I
You were saying something about, I read that Bill Clinton actually is the one that convinced Donald Trump to run as a Republican, to change parties.
Is that hearsay, or?
I don't have
actually
proof,
seen.
but I read that some time ago.
Well, I've gotten in plenty of trouble my own self for explaining how it seems that riding with the sheriff, who's a Democrat, and we talk about politics he's seen, and he explained how he's seen both the Democrats and the Republicans drift further and further to the extreme. And that's when somebody said, well, I'm not a real conservative or something because I'm hanging around. Anyway, and if Donald does wind up with the nomination, what the hell are we going to do? Will it be a floor fight on the Is there some other outlet that we can do to remove him if he wins?
Well, I think tomorrow a lot of that's going to be decided, and it's going to come down to specifically how many delegates can the other candidates get. Because even if Donald Trump goes in with a plurality of the delegates, maybe 30 or 40% into the convention, then it's still those other 60 or 70% of delegates can band together against Donald Trump and nominate someone like a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio, who would be a much more
Well, in Texas,
advantageous candidate.
it's all, he's going to get all of them.
No,
No?
no.
If it's 55%, I think I read
It's,
today.
It's 50%.
It's a very complicated formula. It goes by congressional district, and it used to be winner takes all, and winner takes all, at least had the simplicity of, you knew how it worked. They've come up with this formula that I don't even think Steve Munisteri can explain how it
Holy
works.
cow, if he can't figure it out, nobody can.
But basically everybody who gets any percent of the vote is going to get some delegates out of Texas. But we will see a lot is going to be decided in the next 2 weeks with Super Tuesday tomorrow, and then a lot of the remaining critical primaries on March 15th. If Rubio can't carry Florida, I don't think he's a viable candidate. So, if Trump is the nominee, I think what you'll see is people will fall into line, just like Chris Christie has endorsed him and Jeff Sessions has endorsed him. You'll find that a lot of other people figure that even a flawed Donald Trump is better than Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. And
I can go for that, yeah.
yeah.
I can't, but
I know, that's what I'm trying to figure out. If he does wind up as our nominee, so many people will not vote. I can see, I guess you're right, Hillary could wind up winning.
Well,
Or Bernie Sanders, go ahead. up front.
I think it's interesting to also keep track of the other side of the aisle and their presidential race, because if Sanders wins, and I don't know how viable Sanders is as a candidate, but that Michael Bloomberg has said that he may jump into the race if it's a Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders ticket. So it'll be interesting to see the third parties that may arise out of this scenario. And I'm not sure how successful they will be, but I'm sure that they will definitely be in existence.
And even if you're as rich as Bloomberg, and even if you have some name ID, it's hard at this stage to jump into a race, get qualified to be on the ballot in all 50 states, and to be a credible third-party candidate. And there really hasn't been a credible third-party candidate in my lifetime. And I can remember George Wallace. He talked about Dixie
I remember
Press.
that.
But
We're showing our age now, huh?
yeah, but
Well-
those are things that, they didn't jump in, March of the election year. So I'm not sure that there's really, the only way to stop Trump at this point is for voters, and there's going to be a lot of voters in Texas who are going to be voting tomorrow, to make sure that they do vote and make sure that they vote for Ted Cruz, is who I support.
There you go, you got a push up behind you.
I had a feeling you were on my side.
Yeah, to slow down this train, because that's the only way we're going to stop this train, is by swinging the voters to the other candidates.
In my opinion, that should be the number one priority for the GOP right now, is stopping Donald Trump.
Oh, definitely.
Honestly.
Damn, I don't know.
Okay, we got some smart students here.
Exactly, pretty much, huh? I told you. Mr. Lee?
I was wondering, we spend too much time talking about someone we don't need to be talking about.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're supposed to anyway, but I had to go on there to find out about
I'd,
this
I,
phenomenon
We
that he
did have that
is.
extra 30 minutes.
I'd like
so-
for James to explain why he feels Cruz is the appropriate candidate to support.
I like Cruz for several reasons. First of all, he's a Texan, and as a native-born Texan myself, it's obviously really neat. But also his experience as the Texas Solicitor General, and then the years that he's had in the U.S. Senate. In that time, and
there you go.
serving as a senator,
Right there, yeah.
he's shown us a very, very transparent and clear record. He's been very open, and he's said exactly what he's going to do. He told us what he was going to do when he went to Washington, and then he went to Washington. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. That quality is rare in a politician, and when I see it, I think that's just something magnificent that I'm definitely willing to vote for, and actually already have early voted for. But honestly, his transparency, his experience, and the fact that he's Texan, that's the reason that I vote for him. Those are the 3 reasons.
Well, you're not gonna like me, because I'm afraid I was a Dewhurst fan.
Uh-oh.
Well, I actually voted for a Dewhurst because I didn't realize all the things that Ted Cruz had done.
I just know Dewhurst got us this far. Now they're on to Speaker of the House. What's his name? Speaker of the House.
Joe Strauss.
Joe Strauss.
Yeah, Strauss. I said, what's so bad about him? But evidently I'm way behind somewhere. Anyway,
This guy's so extremely intelligent. Not just
Cruz or
integrity.
Dewhurst?
No, Cruz. He's extremely intelligent, and he's gone to the Supreme Court 9 times, winning, even beat on the world. I think so, what I loved about reading the book about Ted Cruz's life is I didn't realize what was going on here in Austin as the solicitor, and what all I knew about the 10 Commandments and knew about the Pledge of Allegiance, and which was always important to me because even in the 3rd grade is when I grew up in Austin with Madeline Murray O'Hara
oh boy.
that took
That's
away
a name I
our
hadn't heard in a long
freedom.
time.
Yeah, we are showing your age now.
Didn't she disappear? They never did find out what happened to her?
No, but I mean, I was in the 3rd grade when they said, "Oh, you can't pray anymore," and we used to sing our song, and I still remember I could not eat that day. It was like, "What? I can't pray?" It was a big deal to me.
He's done a lot.
Yep.
And he's been through some, and you had no problem getting the school records either, I guess. Go ahead, Mr. Lee. I know you had something to say before we go back to the youngsters.
You can pray now if you're Islamic.
Isn't that terrible? Yeah.
Maybe we should pray for Cruz.
I do. I am with the group that does pray for him. Every time there's a primary, we pray and we fast.
How long would that take?
What?
Let's pray for Cruz right quick.
Okay. You gonna?
Dear Lord, give us all the intelligence we need to figure out what the hell to do, and get the people out too tomorrow. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, I should say amen for Ted Cruz too.
You are? I didn't
Well,
know
I already
that.
voted for Ben Carson, so it's a little late. But now I realize I may have wasted my vote
I
because
think a lot of
every
same
vote
with
that doesn't go
Bush,
to
right? Anybody that voted absentee for Bush, that's
oh well, that's back in the hanging anyway.
yeah.
Yeah, I did vote. That's another thing I can throw in here real quick. Is but you say if he does win, you won't vote for him. But I'm going to vote the R. Period.
Yeah, I can't because that's
And
just my.
That was one of the
moral.
problems I had because I see it. He's better than Bernie Sanders. He's
Yeah.
better than Hillary Clinton. I don't care how much I hate him.
I guess I'll have to check on Bloomberg. I don't know much about him.
No, you don't want to know about Bloomberg. But it gets when you get and third party. I don't like third party. When you look at any country that has more than 2 parties, what do you want? Italy? England?
Yeah, we got Bill Clinton as president because Ross Perot
Yep.
Yep.
Right.
Third
took
party.
away enough of the vote. So they usually do not do good things for Republican candidates.
No.
Yeah. And
And part of this nation's great strength is 2-party, and we have had radical change of power without firing a shot. That's the important stuff too. And our strength comes from it's only 2 parties. They're not going to be perfect. I may not like the general, but I'm not going to quit him in the middle of the battlefield just because I don't approve of his leadership. We have methods to exchange that leadership. We're going through one of them now, and if it winds up with another, curse word, then we just got to fight on. We'll get to that before it's over with. We're almost halfway in. To fight on with some of these down ballot races that I always try to say are so damn important. But should we go there yet, or can we go somewhere? Let's go there now.
Okay, so Texas is very unusual in 2 respects. One, it has partisan elections for all judges, from the trial court all the way up to the highest court. And that's a pretty, it's definitely a minority position among the states. And I forgot what the other thing was. It's a good thing I'm not running for president. Here's the other thing that makes Texas unusual is that it has, in effect, 2 Supreme Courts. In most states, you have a Supreme Court that is the highest court in that state that hears civil and criminal appeals. In Texas, you have intermediate courts of appeal that hear both civil and criminal cases, but then criminal cases get appealed to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest court in Texas with jurisdiction over criminal cases. And civil cases, you have the Texas Supreme Court, but the two courts really have co-equal power. But they, one only hears civil cases, one only hears criminal cases, and we get to vote on all of them. Now, both courts have 9 judges. The Texas Supreme Court, all 9 of those judges are Republicans, and you vote for them for a 6-year term. So there's 3 judges on the ballot each election, and the same thing with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. There, all 9 of the judges were elected as Republicans, but one of the judges, a guy named Larry Myers, in 2013 switched parties and is now a Democrat. And the reason he switched over to be a Democrat is so we could run against Jeff Brown on the Texas Supreme Court. He lost, and he will certainly lose his seat because in the general election, voters can vote straight party ticket, and for the last 20 years, on a statewide basis, only Republicans have won. So when he switched parties, he basically signed his death warrant. But what we have is all 3 of the races on both 3 in the Supreme Court and 3 on the Court of Criminal Appeals, they're all contested in the Republican primary. So Republican voters who haven't voted yet, who go to the polls tomorrow, are going to have 6 different races to vote for. And it can be pretty confusing because at least one of these races has 4 candidates, one of them has 3 candidates, and all the rest of them have 2 candidates. So that's a lot of homework to do. Now, anybody that wants to do some homework tonight, I would suggest that they go to a website, votesmarttexas.com. votesmarttexas.com. And this website is devoted to the judicial races and has pretty thorough biographies and analyses of all of the candidates. Now, so that's sort of an overview of how the courts work and and why they're on the ballot. And if anybody, unless anybody has anything else to talk about, I could like to jump into these races.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there's 3 races on the Texas Supreme Court. One is the incumbent Deborah Lerman is being challenged by a lawyer. He's a former lawyer. Now he's on the Court of Appeal in Houston named Michael Massengale. And Michael Massengale was a litigation partner at Baker Botts, which is a very large and prestigious firm. And then he was appointed to the First Court of Appeals in Houston in 2009 and has been elected since then. What's interesting about this race is that Deborah Lerman was elected 6 years ago, and she defeated Rick Green in that race. And when she ran, there was a runoff, and some of these races may go to a runoff because they have so many candidates, nobody's going to be able to get more than 50% of the vote. But this statewide tort reform group, Texans for Lawsuit Reform, endorsed her. But over the last 6 years, her voting record as a judge has concerned them enough so that they pulled their endorsement and have endorsed Michael Massengale. And one of the reasons is that she dissents more often than any other judge on the court, and most of her dissents are in cases involving Texas's tort reform legislation, and in a couple of her dissents she has opined that this legislation is unconstitutional under the state constitution. One of these times she dissented. She was the only one to dissent. So Texans for Lawsuit Reform basically lost confidence in her and has endorsed Michael Massengale, as has Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, Rick Perry, and the Texas Medical Association. So that's a race that's going to be a real horse race. The race that I think conservatives are watching the most closely is the Paul Green versus Rick Green race. Paul Green is the incumbent. He's been on the Texas Supreme Court for 12 years. For 10 years before that, he was on the Court of Appeal in San Antonio, and he practiced law for 17 years before that. Normally, you would think, how could a guy like this lose an election? He was the former president of the San Antonio Bar Association. He's been endorsed by Texans for Lawsuit Reform, and Rick Perry and some Tea Party groups. He was endorsed by the statewide Texan Republican Assembly. But Rick Green, who is very well known in evangelical circles and in the homeschooling community because of his association with David Barton, chose, and there were 3 races that he could have run in, including he could have had a rematch against Deborah Lerman, who beat him 6 years ago, but he chooses to run against the incumbent judge that has the same last name that he does. How ironic that is. And Rick Green has no judicial experience, does not primarily practice law, served in the legislature for 4 years, but it was a controversial 4 years. Texas Monthly rated him one of the worst legislators in Texas. He's endorsed by, among other people, Chuck Norris, which is sort of an unusual endorsement to be bragging about in a judicial race. And
That's fine by me.
he frankly has done some things when he was in the legislature lobbying for Metabolife, which was later found to be selling a drug that was the chemical equivalent of methamphetamine.
Holy cow.
He filmed an infomercial in his legislative office for a dietary supplement, Focus Factor. He advocated early parole for a guy named Melvin Cox, who had been sentenced to 16 years for running a Ponzi scheme that he bilked $30 million out of his friends and associates, including the people in his own church congregation. And Rick Green advocated and successfully obtained early parole when this guy had served less than 3 years of his 16-year sentence. But the worst thing is, after he was defeated in his district down there in Dripping Springs by a guy named Patrick Rose, 4 years after he lost that election, he saw Patrick Rose at a polling place, punched him.
Oh,
I remember that.
And he was arrested. He had a deferred adjudication, but he was on probation for 6 months. After he lost this election 6 years ago, he sued former Texas Supreme Court Chief Justice Tom Phillips for libel. And when Tom Phillips filed his answer, which showed with great documentation how all of these things that he said were true, Rick Green dropped that lawsuit like a hot rock without receiving any payment. So, I have to say, notwithstanding some of the endorsements that Rick Green has gotten from people who are very credible, if you look at his record and you look at Paul Green's record, I don't think this is even a close call, and I've written about this race in the National Review and in the American Spectator, and I strongly endorse Paul Green and voted for Paul Green. Okay, the last of the 3 Texas Supreme Court races is Eva Guzman, who was appointed to the bench by Rick Perry when he was governor and has subsequently been elected, is a great justice. She had 9 years of experience on the Court of Appeal in Houston before she was put on the Texas Supreme Court. She was a trial judge in Harris County for several years before that. She has a great record. She had a dissenting opinion in one case in Texas that had to do with patent law, and because it had to do with patent law, it was something that the U.S. Supreme Court could hear, and the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the Texas Supreme Court and took her side of this dispute, which is that's pretty savvy on her part. She's been endorsed by Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, TLR, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility, virtually every Republican in the state, and she's running against this guy Joe Poole, who has no judicial experience, who in his career as a lawyer in private practice has been disciplined by the State Bar of Texas And he previously ran for the Texas Supreme Court in 2012 and again in 2014. He's never gotten more than 30% of the vote. So everybody wonders, well, why would this guy be running against Eva Guzman? And the speculation is that it sometimes happens when people haven't done their homework, and I hope everybody who votes tomorrow does their homework. They see an unfamiliar name on the ballot, and if it's kind of an exotic name, and then you have a name that seems more, Anglo,
Rick Green.
or Joe Poole, that they would vote for Joe Poole. In Dallas, there's a lot of people that are familiar with the name Joe Poole because Joe Poole, even though he's a Republican, or claims to be a Republican, his father was a state legislator and a congressman as a Democrat, and there's actually a lake up in Dallas named Joe Poole Lake. So the polling shows that there are a certain number of people who favor Joe Poole just because they're presumably familiar with the lake in Dallas. But it would be a travesty in my mind if Eva Guzman lost this election to Joe Poole, who has really no qualifications to be a judge, has been disciplined as a lawyer, and this is his third run as a candidate. And anyway, I picked Massengale over Lerman. I pick Paul Green over Rick Green, and I definitely pick Eva Guzman over Joe Poole.
Name recognition is very important because so many of us, and I'm guilty of this in the past when I was younger.
Any youngsters got any questions? Youngsters, I mean young men.
I would have one question, and I have not extensively looked into the Rick Green versus Paul Green race, but one thing that the supporters of Rick Green are alleging is that Paul Green legislated from the bench in his decision on the divorce case that came before Texas, whether or not they could be granted a divorce.
I'm very glad you brought that up. The decision that you're talking about was decided in 2015, and it's called State v. Naylor, and it's sometimes referred to as the gay divorce case. And here's what happened. Two lesbians got married in Massachusetts, where it was possible to be married, and then they moved to Texas. And after they moved to Texas, they decided that they didn't want to be married after all. It's one of those things, the gays want to get married until they don't want to get married anymore. All right, so they brought a divorce action in, I think it was right here in Travis County, and the Attorney General, who was Greg Abbott at the time, was keeping his eye on this because at the time Texas had in its Constitution a provision that says we do not recognize same-sex marriage. Marriage is between one man and one woman. And the district court granted the divorce. After the judgment was entered in the trial court, the Attorney General intervened in the case. The only problem with that is that under long-standing Texas law, you cannot intervene in a case after a judgment has been entered. If you intervene in the case after judgment's been entered, you're not a party. So neither one of these lesbians appealed the divorce. They were happy to be divorced. However, the Attorney General, speaking for the state of Texas, appealed it. It went to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal said, we can't hear this appeal because the appeal is, nobody has standing to bring an appeal. And then it went to the Texas Supreme Court. In a 5-3 decision, with Judge Lerman abstaining for reasons that she's never explained, the opinion, which was written not by Paul Green, but it was written by Jeff Brown, who's one of the more conservative judges on the court, said we can't hear this appeal because the intervention was untimely and therefore we don't have jurisdiction. 3 judges filed a dissenting opinion saying you should have made a special exception because this was the Attorney General that missed the deadline for intervening. I think the proper way to look at this is that it would have been an activist decision to disregard longstanding procedural rules to entertain an appeal that nobody had standing to bring. But whatever you say about it, it had nothing to do with the merits of gay marriage, gay divorce. It was strictly a procedural decision. And I find it, I'm a lifelong conservative. You're not going to find too many lawyers who can get to my right. And I just think it's an outrageous misstatement of the case to say that this somehow indicates that the Supreme Court is squishy, that it's pro-gay marriage, and then after this decision, a week after this decision was issued, in any event, the U.S. Supreme Court decided the Obergefell v. Hodges case, which recognized same-sex marriage as a matter of U.S. constitutional law, which makes the provision in the Texas Constitution unenforceable. So I think there's really nothing to this contention that Naylor somehow is evidence that Paul Green, who didn't even write the decision, is unfit to serve on the court. I think he's exceptionally well qualified, and it kind of bothers me that people would try to mislead, because there's a lot of people out there who are upset about Obergefell, and I'm one of them. But to try to exploit that frustration and to try to use that to get your foot in the door and get on the court, even though in Rick Green's case he has no prior judicial experience, very little practical legal experience, I think it's a cynical ploy. And I think that evangelicals, once they figure out what happened here, are going to be kind of upset, because this is not really an accurate statement of what the Naylor case stands for. Okay, if I could just have a few minutes to run through these Texas Court of Criminal Appeals races. All right, these are...
If you ain't lost us by now, you're not going to. Go right ahead.
Okay, these are some very interesting races, and there's 3 of them on the ballot. One is place 2. That's where Larry Myers, who was elected as a Republican, switched over as a Democrat. He's going to be on the ballot in November as the Democrat, trying to hold his seat. But one of these candidates, these 3 candidates, is going to be the Republican nominee running against him. Now, because there's 3 people running, it's possible that there'll be a runoff, but if any one of them can get 50% plus 1, he'll be the nominee. So all 3 of these candidates are sitting district court judges. 2 of them are from Collin County, and one of them is from Harris County. And they're all pretty experienced, pretty well qualified, but one of them, Chris Aldner, has the misfortune of getting involved in the Ken Paxton indictment. Mm-hmm. And he's not the guy that appointed these special prosecutors, but he was the person that actually received the indictment from the grand jury, handled it, and the way he handled it has been criticized, that he leaked it, he shared it with his wife who leaked it, that a court clerk up there got demoted and suspended because she was involved in this. Anyway, but for that, I think would be a pretty highly regarded candidate, but I think that is going to kill him in this Republican primary. His colleague from Collin County District Court is Ray Wallace, who is a pretty gregarious guy, and he's been working the state pretty hard, and he's got the most endorsements, and I think he's probably going to win. The third candidate, Mary Lou Keel, is a very strict law and order judge from Harris County, but she's so law and order that there have been actually a couple of cases that she has been reversed by the Court of Criminal Appeals. One of them was somebody that turned out to be factually innocent, who she refused to grant a new trial, and the Court of Criminal Appeals, made her or overturned her. So, and as Ray Wallace points out, she's married to a liberal Democrat who is a personal injury lawyer, and Republican voters don't like that. So you have Chris Aldner, Ray Wallace, Mary Lou Keel. I would bet that Ray Wallace wins that. But you should do your homework out there. VoteSmartTexas.com. There's a pretty good explanation of all of these. Now, the second race that's on the ballot for the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is the only one of these races that's an open seat. The incumbent is a woman named Cheryl Johnson, and she's been on there. She's been elected twice, but she's retiring. She's not running for reelection. And in that race, we have 4 candidates running. Sid Harrell, which is like Harley, but it doesn't have a Y at the end, is a district judge from San Antonio. He's been on the bench for 25 years. He has tried more capital murder cases as a judge than any other judge in Texas. He's a pretty experienced guy. The second person running in that race is a fellow named Steve Smith. That's what he's calling himself now. He's run for office like 5 or 6 times as Stephen Wayne Smith. Most of the times that he's run before this, he was running for the Texas Supreme Court. He actually got lucky one time and was on the court for 2 years, but then he was beaten by Paul Green. So it's, this cast of characters just keeps going around in a circle. He really doesn't have any criminal law experience whatsoever, and I don't regard him as a serious candidate. The third person in that race, Brent Webster, is a prosecutor from Williamson County, and I know a lot of the same people that endorsed Rick Green endorsed him, and I've met him, and he's a good guy. He's very young, and then the fourth person in the race is somebody nobody's ever heard of, Scott Walker, and he's just a guy that put his name on the ballot, but is not really a serious candidate. So I view this as Sid Harrell versus Brent Webster, and I know Brent's a good guy. He doesn't have the same kind of experience that Sid Harrell does, so I think voters should do their homework. I think either one of them would do a good job. I'm somebody, because I have gray hair, I sort of tend to prefer the people with the gray hair, and so Sid Harrell gets my nod on that race. Then the last race.
And what
Yes.
place is that?
That's called Place 5.
Okay.
Then there's Place 6. And Place 6, we have the incumbent judge. And it's funny, the Court of Criminal Appeals, they call themselves judges. The Texas Supreme Court, they call themselves justices. Why that is, I don't know.
Go figure, huh?
Yeah, go figure. But anyway, Mike Kiesler is the incumbent judge, and he's been on the court since 1999. And I think the only person that's been there longer is the fellow that switched parties, who's not going to be there much longer, Larry Myers. And he's very, very well qualified. And again, he's picked up an opponent. This year, they dispensed with the requirement that you get a bunch of signatures. So all you have to do is show up with a check, and you can get on the ballot. And a lot of people showed up on the last day and sort of say, okay, who doesn't have an opponent? Well, I'll pick him. So this guy, Richard Davis, who has no relevant experience, is running against this extremely experienced, well-qualified incumbent, Mike Kiesler. So, and that one is not going to have a runoff because there's just the two of them. So, my money is on Mike Kiesler. And it'll be interesting to see if in these other two races that have the 3 candidates and the 4 candidates, if anybody is able to win it outright. If not, there will be a runoff.
Oh, that's a lot of information. Thanks for
I
sharing it.
I kind of look at things sometimes in large terms, and I think I posted this on Facebook the other day. I was thinking to myself, I said, this country was founded on the idea of having an informed electorate.
Yeah.
And with people making decisions who had a stake in what was going on.
Yeah.
I think we've evolved to the point where we have basically ignorant electorate
Did post that.
and a media with an agenda. And I think that kind of explains what's happening in the presidential race on the Republican side. There's not a lot of substance out there from the current leader, according to the polls and media.
And so many
But-
people are so caught up on their own, what's going on, raising your family and stuff, that it's the night before the election that you start finding out, okay, who's running?
It's like TV has taken over.
Well, I didn't want Mr. Pulliam. I didn't want you to take this personal or nothing, but I was kind of excited when you told me you were going to come on.
Yeah.
Nothing personal, you understand. Just because, I've known about you from the party. And while you didn't make it any more exciting than I could have, it's obviously exciting for legal type people. Mm-hmm. And if you could how does this relate to the common ordinary man driving a truck or
Our housewife.
a housewife? Is there some way you could quickly relate this to a housewife?
Sure. Well, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is a very important court because if you are charged with a crime that you didn't commit, it is the court of last resort. And you have to recognize that, unfortunately, there are politically inspired prosecutions that take place in Texas.
Just seen some.
Rick Perry, in the last week, was vindicated by this Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which found that this charge that had been brought against him for vetoing funding to the Travis County District Attorney's Office was a felony. And they said that's incorrect, it's not a crime, and they dismissed the charges outright, which unfortunately had a very detrimental effect on his final term as governor. It was a sort of a stain on his record, probably made it impossible for him to be a viable presidential candidate this cycle. But this is not the first time that this has happened.
My hero, Tom DeLay.
Tom DeLay was victimized by a politically inspired.
Career ruined.
Well, yeah, and he was in limbo, had to spend a fortune in attorney's fees on a charge, and this was Gary Cobb, who's running for district attorney in Travis County, is the guy that he brags about it. He has full-page ads.
He's still bragging about it.
I won that case. You didn't win that case. You presided over a miscarriage of justice, and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals found that he was prosecuted for something that was not a crime. So there are cases. Michael Morton here in Williamson County was the wrong person at the wrong place at the wrong time and was convicted, had a prosecutor buried evidence. So it's good to know that you have judges on the Court of Criminal Appeals who are capable of vindicating innocent people when charges are being brought against them, but at the same time making sure that people who committed crimes, particularly violent crimes, don't get off on technicalities and serve their whole sentences. That's pretty much what the Court of Criminal Appeals does. The Texas Supreme Court decides cases involving every other aspect of law. It could be family law questions about child support and divorces, contract, employment, all kinds of law. And it's important that you have solid jurists deciding these cases. I spent 30 years practicing law in California, and it's astonishing to me the kind of contrast that we have
Not
between.
a California lawyer.
Well, I went to school here,
Oh, okay.
and I'm licensed in both jurisdictions. But in California, it's commonplace for a judge just to make things up. That who do you want to win a case? Okay, well, we're going to rule in favor of this party, and we will invent some rationale to justify that result. That's not how it's done in Texas. And we have a conservative Republican legislature that has passed laws, and we can be confident by electing sound judges to the Texas Supreme Court that those laws will be upheld. That you won't have the Supreme Court acting like a legislature saying, well, we don't like this law, so we're going to ignore it, we're going to misconstrue it, we're going to declare it unconstitutional, et cetera. So, the courts are one of your three branches of government. And if you have bad people in charge of one of your branches of government, you're going to get bad outcomes. And the problem with having a bad court is that it can undermine what the executive branch does, what the governor does. It can undermine what the legislature does. But when everybody's on the same team, you can accomplish great things. And in Texas, we have accomplished great things. We have the Texas Miracle with because of our tort reform legislation, our low taxes, low spending. We've got the most successful economy in the country. And, it's produced an embarrassment of riches, that we have so many jobs in Texas that we're attracting more people to move
California.
to Texas than a lot of people from California. No, I think courts are very important, and courts will only do a good job if you have good people on the courts, and because they're all elected, they depend on voters making informed decisions. The other thing is, I guess I would make a pitch for this, is that what a judge does is different than what a legislator does. You vote for a legislator on the grounds that you want to vote for somebody who thinks like you do, because what they do is, by how they vote on proposed legislation, they're enacting their will into law. That's not what a judge does. A judge is just interpreting the law and applying the law. He's not making law. So when you see a guy, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but like a Rick Green.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be a different kind of judge. And see it clock over there behind
We're
the.
fine.
We're
got-
fine still?
I think we
Keep
got
going.
35
Yeah,
minutes.
so,
Go ahead.
Just a short version, maybe.
We
okay,
got
so,
an extra 30 minutes
Well,
on
we
this
gotta get
program.
back to the other kids too.
Yeah.
well, anyway, so he may be that if you agree with him and he has the same worldview that you have, that would be a good reason to vote for him as a legislator, but he's not running as a legislator. He's running for the Texas Supreme Court, and what the skills you're looking for, the qualities you're looking for, is somebody who is knowledgeable in the law, who understands the law, and who's capable of applying the law without regard to the outcome, sort of like this Naylor case, that if the law is that if you don't intervene in a timely way, you don't have standing to appeal. Well, you may not like the outcome, but you have to apply the law, or else you're not really doing your job as a judge. So I think these judicial races, because there's so many of them on the ballot, are probably as important as anything else that voters will do tomorrow.
We didn't hear yet from Connor about his support for Carson.
Yeah, so random subject change, but no.
Not to go in a different direction here, but
Exactly.
we do got to
Really appreciate your information you've
Yeah, I
given us
do,
today.
because it is. I know it is important, and what he says with the tort reform, not to go off here on you, but it can do things like lower your grocery prices.
Yep.
Now, how do you connect the Texas judicial system to lower grocery prices? It's a little bit more difficult for me to do, but it does connect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think when it comes to Carson, I think that a lot of people looking at the presidential ballot are forced to ask the choice, do I vote for who I agree with? Do I vote for the ideal candidate, or do I vote for the person that's going to beat Trump? And that's a hard situation that a lot of people are put into. I know myself, going into the ballot box, I had to make the decision of whether or not I was going to vote for the ideal candidate that aligned with, my personal beliefs, or whether or not I was going to vote with the candidate that would beat Trump. And honestly, I think that the more logical solution at this point is to vote for the candidate that is going to beat Trump, or at least stay Trump. And I agree with James King and the others on this panel who have said that the best way to do that in Texas is to vote Cruz. Even though I think that Carson would be a great presidential candidate, and I think that he could beat Hillary Clinton, the only way that he's ever going to have a chance to do that is if they make it to the convention. And I don't know Carson's actions when it comes to whether or not he'll drop out if he gets delegates. I do know that he's not necessarily looking at this as a cost-benefit analysis. By all logic, he should have dropped out after losing some of the early primaries, just as Jeb Bush did, or just as Chris Christie did. But he doesn't see this race as, an opportunity to get his name out there, maybe for the next presidential election or for the book deals, as some have said. I honestly think that he thinks this is his mandate from the people, and as long as people continue to support him in any way or fashion, he will continue to go and to campaign. And so I think that we will have the opportunity to see maybe a brokered convention in which Carson plays a significant role. It will be a long shot, but I don't think it's an impossibility.
Thank you so much for that, because I know that's really an important point that you're making there.
Yeah, and we I got the schedule now. We got about 15 minutes left, maybe 12. So go ahead.
Yeah, in my view of Carson was and is, his philosophy and his narrative are consistent with what I believe. His narrative is similar to mine also. My reservation only occurred with respect to, I don't know about his administrative ability to run a government. I know he's run a medical practice, but not running this government and running a medical practice to me are just so far apart that I couldn't make a judgment or assessment of his ability or capabilities on that point.
And I think that's a concern that many voters have. But when you look at what the actual function of the executive is, the executive is not, an octopus that has his hand in every area of the government. The best feature, the best aspect of an executive comes from their ability to manage and to lead and to present a complete and cohesive idea to the administration that they are leading. And I think that Carson is able to do that. He says in his debates that he's had more, late night calls than any other candidates. I think that's true. I think that, when we look back on the history of the United States, the great moments of the United States presidency didn't come from presidents that were confronted with situations that were natural or that were normal or that were to be expected. I think that presidents react in great ways when they're presented with situations that are not normal, that are not to be expected. And I think that Carson has the opportunity, Carson has the personality, the ability to be able to react in those ways and to be a great president if he's called to do so. And that's the problem, is in this election, again, we're forced to make the choice that Trump has unfortunately forced upon us, put us in a bind, so to speak, that we have to choose between a great candidate, an ideal candidate, and a candidate that doesn't represent the values of the Republican Party in any way.
Well, one thing that I was encouraged about Carson's candidacy is it establishes one thing that I always suspected: racial politics can only work if you're a Democrat.
Yeah, I agree full-heartedly. I think if you look at the stage for the Republican debates, you see the party of diversity. You see the party that includes, not excludes. And I think that, Carson is a sign that the Republican Party is not the party of, the white man, as the Democratic Party would like you to believe. It's very much the opposite of that.
And I don't want to make it sound like everything revolves around judges, but judges are important even at the federal level. Mm-hmm. And the untimely recent death of Justice Scalia shows how, he was on the court for 29 years, appointed by Reagan, but just now, so he's continued to have enormous influence long after Reagan left office. And so we're going to have that vacancy. And then there's 3 other justices that are either right at or over 80 years old who might very well die or retire in the next 4 years, certainly in the next 8 years. So this president that we elect in November, one of the greatest and most influential things that they will do is not who they picked as their vice president or who's in their cabinet. It's who they appoint to the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is why I think it's so critically important that we get behind a Republican who's electable, who could beat Hillary Clinton, and who we have confidence is going to put the right people on the court. I think that person is Ted Cruz. And as he has said, and it's true, a lot of these very important decisions that we've taken for granted over the last 5 to 10 years are 5-4 decisions, with Justice Scalia being part of the 5.
That's right.
And all we'd have to do is get the wrong person to fill that vacancy, and suddenly it's going to be 5-4 decisions going the other way. And then if you have 3 more vacancies come up and a Hillary Clinton could fill them, we could be talking about losing ground and facing this for decades to come. It's really almost a unbelievable calamity.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that when you look at the candidates in the Republican Party, obviously most of them, if not all of them, are going to be better choices for the office of the executive in reference to making those Supreme Court decisions. Now, you can argue that Trump is, the exception to that rule, but I think if you look at Ted Cruz, a man who argued in front of the Supreme Court, a man who has spent his career interpreting the Constitution, defending the Constitution, I think that him, along with, Dr. Carson in defending the Constitution and studying the Constitution, and even Rubio, I think those men are going to be a lot better than, Donald Trump, who may be able to negotiate and may be able to make deals, but is he going to be able to defend the Constitution?
Not the kind of deals we wanted him
Yeah.
made.
Yeah.
There are certain things that you can't compromise on and make deals on, and I think a Supreme Court vacancy and the confirmation process there is one thing that we cannot afford to get wrong.
And Trump is actually, he might have been joking, but he actually said that the kind of person that he would like to put on the Supreme Court is his sister.
Who's a
on
very
the-
liberal,
Yeah, who
very
was
social.
appointed to the Court of Appeal by Bill Clinton, and who has voted in favor of partial birth abortion. She's exactly the kind of person we don't want on the court.
Exactly.
Judge Judy for Supreme Court.
Judge Judy from Supreme Court. That's a good point about, all right, we got 2 minutes yet? Put the slate up, no, we got 2 minutes.
Slate up, but anyway, when you were talking about Supreme Courts, Judge Judy.
Aaron,
That
you
like
want to
the
say a
trailer
few
park.
things about Rubio? We didn't talk much about, and he's so cute. I mean, if I voted for cuteness, I would vote for
Lord.
him.
I love his ears.
Well, in addition to the cuteness factor, I think there's a couple of big reasons why I support Rubio, and I think the first is that something that we've been echoing here in our recent discussion. But whenever I assess this election, there's ultimately one issue that matters, and that's who can win not this primary election, not who can beat Donald Trump, but who can win the general election and ensure that there's not another 8-year, in essence, Obama administration. Because if you look at the devastation that our country has suffered at the hands of a Democratic president for 8 years, an economy perpetually stuck in the doldrums, and we're told that that's supposed to be the new normal, that China will inevitably catch and overtake us as the world economic power. And are we?
We're
No,
still
we got-
live.
we-
It's
We're
just
supposed to have
a,
2 more
Okay.
minutes after the
Gotcha.
slate, but I didn't think the slate was coming out quite this early, Ma.
But
Anyway,
anyways, the
see?
we got
Oh.
you live back on there. Keep going.
Keep going.
we're still
A
good.
few
All
more
right,
minutes.
awesome.
I did want to give each of you at least time to make some kind of final statement.
Definitely, and the military being gutted, the healthcare system being totally reconstructed. My dad's a doctor. My family has felt that change quite personally, and we cannot have another Democrat in the White House for 8 years. And we just talked about the extreme importance of appointing a Supreme Court justice that will stand for individual liberty, that will stand for the Judeo-Christian values on social issues. And I think whenever you assess the current Republican field, are we still?
Yeah,
You're-
she was just
Still-
telling us to
still
hurry
go.
up, so.
All right. Well, whenever you look at the current field, Rubio is the only candidate that's currently beating both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in national polls above the margin of error. So he will win a general election if he's nominated by the Republican Party.
There's the
And-
Vote Smart Texas. Yeah, that is a good one.
Yeah.
I don't mean to cut you off. Trying to hurry up.
Yeah, and so that's ultimately why I support Rubio and why I think all Republicans should vote for him, because it matters a great deal less who the Republican in the White House is compared to just the fact that we get someone there. And right now, if you look at Trump's numbers, he's losing to Hillary Clinton. Cruz is within a percentage point of Hillary Clinton. Ben Carson is also within a percentage point. So the only way that we can absolutely ensure that our country gets back on the right track is if we nominate Marco Rubio for president.
Aaron, I do have a concern about people in Florida that that voted for Marco Rubio, and when he went to be in the Senate, that he did not do what he said he would do, and he ganged up with the gang of 8, instead of doing what he said to the voters, like Ted Cruz did in Texas. he did represent us, did exactly what he said he would do, and more.
Well, Mom's telling us to hurry up because she wants to play some tapes to roll us out with. Next. Throw something out there. Go ahead.
Oh,
That you?
okay. Do you want me to?
Yeah, just let him answer my question, because I really would like to know.
Okay, so on the issue of the Gang of Eight and the immigration, the comprehensive immigration reform that was going through Congress that ultimately failed, I think if you look at the immigration crisis we face, we really do need an overhaul of our system. Right now, we seem to be presented over the last 30 years with two options: only amnesty from the liberal side and only increased border security from the conservative. And I think we need a balanced approach, and Marco Rubio believes this as well. And that's what the Gang of Eight was working towards. And so specifically on that, the issue of immigration, I think he was just standing for a more balanced, more effective legislative stance.
Okay, go, James, quick.
Do you maybe a closing statement or something about Cruz or
Yeah.
Oh,
something like that? I just want to say.
I got y'all mixed up. I thought the other guy was James.
Oh, do you want me to say something or someone?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll
Okay.
get back to it. Just
I'm-
everybody gets a little something. Where to
Sure,
go.
sure. In closing, I just want to say it's so exciting to me that we're talking today about who we're going to vote for instead of whether or not we should vote. Especially with people among my age, Aaron, Connor, people, young people. It's very disheartening, even block walking up in Belton for Representative Molly White, to encounter many disheartened voters that say, I'm not going to vote because I don't think it makes a difference. But when you look at the statistics, we see that 2/3 of eligible voters don't even vote. They don't even take part in changing their country and don't realize that they're the voice for reform. They're the very voice for the changes they want to see in this nation. So I just want to say that it's very encouraging that we're seeing that we're having these discussions about who we should vote for instead of deciding whether or not we even should vote and take part in our country's process of election.
Thank you. Go ahead. Jump.
I'm going to assume that's me. And in closing, I think that, again, this is just an awesome discussion to be having. Instead of having the discussion of, whether or not we should vote, I think that we have to, as the Republican Party, come to the conclusion that we must establish what we are for and what we are against. And Donald Trump does neither of those things. He may have pithy statements and he may have good quotes for the nightly news, but he doesn't have a comprehensive plan. And I think any other candidate that we're advocating for really does.
Okay, it's coming. Quickly, a few words real quick, Mr. Pulliam. When you see a tape show, then you know we're out there.
Okay, so I would just encourage voters to do their homework for these judicial races. VoteSmartTexas.com, and in the Green v. Green, the right green is Paul Green.
Thank you, sir. We'll be back next week. We got another a bunch of preachers be on next week. Boy, what a difference, huh? We appreciate you holding on for us here. This has not been our usual stuff. Good night, folks.
All right.
I think we're
All
on.
right.
Anyway, yeah, we have to be at the studio by 8:30. Means we got.
Here are some of the most powerful words spoken by Jesus in the New Testament. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. By Jesus in the New Testament. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. One of the main points of this teaching is to challenge us not to see ourselves as better or more important than others, but to instead be willing to defend the defenseless. And there's no person more defenseless than an innocent child in the womb. That's why no issue reveals the true character of a candidate for public office more than the life issue. It's more than a litmus test. It's a window to the soul. Ronald Reagan once observed that the right to life was the most important God-given right of them all. For if you're not alive, then everything else is sort of meaningless. The right to life cannot be compromised like other issues, because a person can't be 80% alive and 20% dead. Either their right to life was protected, or it wasn't. A candidate that can't be trusted to protect the right to life can't be trusted to protect any of our other God-given rights either. When you look at the voting records of politicians, what you'll find is if they're bad on life, they're always, I repeat always, bad on everything else too. If a politician will rob a fellow person of their right to life, rest assured they'll rob you of your private property rights, religious liberty, and look for new taxes and regulations to rob you of your hard-earned money as well. Liberty isn't safe in the hands of a politician that doesn't hold all life sacred. For anyone that doesn't hold life sacred can't possibly know what true liberty is or where true liberty comes from. Because the spirit of true American liberty comes from the Creator, in whose image we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Recently, an overwhelming number of South Carolina Republicans affirmed that spirit when 79% of them voted to include language to defend the right to life of all persons, both born and unborn, in the state's Constitution. Mirroring language found in the U.S. Constitution, which states that no person shall be denied life, liberty, or property without due process of law. I enthusiastically support that resolution, and as President of the United States, I pledge to you that I will do everything within my power to end the scourge of abortion once and for all. That I will use the full constitutional power and the bully pulpit of the presidency to promote a culture of life. That I will sign any legislation put on my desk to defend the least of these, including legislation that defends the rights of all persons, without exception other than the life of the mother, from conception to natural death. That I will not only defund Planned Parenthood, but I will instruct the Department of Justice to investigate Planned Parenthood and to prosecute any and all criminal conduct, which those videos that we saw from the Center for Medical Progress so powerfully evidenced. Everything I just pledged to you should be an automatic requirement for any prospective president who takes an oath of office before an all-powerful God to preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The Democratic Party is almost entirely beholden to Planned Parenthood in its gruesome interests. And sadly, too many Republicans have gone wobbly when it comes to one of the most important planks in our party's platform as well. Even now, there's a candidate in the race playing games with the sanctity of life. Donald Trump spent most of his adult life prior to this election enthusiastically pro-abortion, even for partial birth abortion, if you can believe it. Now Donald Trump is the only candidate left in the Republican field who won't even pledge to defund Planned Parenthood, which is why Planned Parenthood named Donald Trump their favorite Republican last fall. If there was ever an award that a Republican politician should be ashamed to receive, that's it. Donald Trump claimed that Planned Parenthood does a lot of good beside all the babies they abort and then sell their dismembered body parts for profit. Which is a little bit like saying Hillary Clinton was a great Secretary of State except for the 4 Americans she left behind to die at Benghazi. Only one thing is going to make America great again. And it's the same thing that made America great in the first place. And that's returning to the ideas of the Declaration of Independence that are enshrined in our Constitution, which declares there is a God, our rights come from Him, and not government. And therefore, government's most important obligation is to protect and defend our God-given rights. And chief among them is the right to life. As Thomas Jefferson said, the care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only object of good government. So this Saturday, as you head off to vote in the crucial South Carolina primary, I ask you to consider, who do you trust to protect your God-given rights? Who do you trust to appoint the Supreme Court justices who will be the critical deciding votes to finally overturn Roe v. Wade? There can be no more powerful statement about the sanctity of life than this. The first person to ever recognize Jesus Christ was his cousin John the Baptist, then himself an unborn child in the womb. Thank you.